Hi guys, we're starting module 14, which is our last module for the semester. Yay! And we're going to be talking specifically about the autonomic nervous system. Now, the autonomic nervous system is usually going to be associated with what we call the fight or flight response, which is basically going to refer to this body preparation to either run away from a threat or stand your ground and fight in the face of whatever that threat is. Now, the autonomic nervous system is then going to be responsible for these physiological responses that are going to make it possible for you to actually respond to this fight or flight. Now, the autonomic nervous system is not only responsible for this type of response, it's also responsible for what we call the rest and digest. So let's say if there's a lion that's trying to catch its prey, they are going to be initially in this fight or flight response, right? So they're running after their prey and they need to make sure that their eyes are going to be wide open, that their heart rate is pumping fast, and that their sweat glands are going to become active, and their circulatory system is going to be pumping more blood. So all this will lead to the fight or flight. And if they get the prey, they can relax and eat their prey. So now they're going to go into the rest and digest. And so they're going to be relaxing and just trying to take it in and eating their food slowly, and then they're going to rest. So this is what we're going to be talking about in this specific module. Before we get started to talk just about the autonomic nervous system, I think it's important for us to compare the organization of the autonomic nervous system, which will be the one that will innervate the visceral effectors or the organs, with the somatic nervous system, which is the one that innervates the skeletal muscles. Now, they do have something in common, which is both of them will have afferent sensory information that will go all the way to the central nervous system, and both of them will have efferent impulses that will be sent to effector organs. Now, one thing that I want to point out from these images is that this image over here and this one also over here, both of them are just showing the efferent pathways. So they're showing the information leaving the central nervous system and arriving at the effector organs. So one thing that I want to point out is that this pathway over here is actually incorrect on the image, because what's passing on the dorsal portion of the spinal cord or on the posterior portion of the spinal cord is actually the afferent. And when it leaves through the anterior portion or the ventral portion of the spinal cord. So this would be the efferent leaving over here, which is this neuron over here. So just keep that in mind. It's just a little bit hard to find images that are free for you guys to not have to pay for the book. So we have the afferent division for the somatic nervous system. They will bring information that will originate in skeletal muscles. Remember that somatic means skeletal muscle. With regards to the afferent pathway of the autonomic nervous system, these will originate in visceral receptors, so receptors that are located in organs, and they will travel all the way to the spinal cord into the brain, and then they will come down as this efferent pathway. If it's an efferent pathway for the somatic nervous system, it will go to the skeletal muscles. So there's going to be actually two neurons. You're going to have what we call the upper motor neuron and the lower motor neuron. Now, both upper motor neurons, they're going to originate over here in the brain, and then one will synapse over here at the level of the brainstem, and the other one will synapse over here at the level of the spinal cord. And then they will synapse with the lower motor neuron that in this case originates on the brainstem and goes to a skeletal muscle. Then the other pathway will have the upper motor neuron that will synapse at the spinal cord with a lower motor neuron, but it will also end on a skeletal muscle and contract that skeletal muscle. So we can say for the somatic nervous system that there's going to be a presence of a nuclei within the central nervous system. This nuclei can be located either in the brain or in the brainstem or in the spinal cord. So all this is part of the central nervous system. And you're going to have two neurons, what we call an upper and a lower motor neuron. When we get to the autonomic nervous system, we already talked how you're going to have the efferent pathways that are going to connect to visceral organs. And now, instead of having a nuclei, we're going to have what we call a ganglia. And why is that? Well, basically because the synapse is going to occur outside of the central nervous system. So it's going to occur in the peripheral nervous system. So remember that if we have a group of cell body neurons located in the central nervous system, we call it a nuclei. If we have a group of cell bodies located outside of the central nervous system in the peripheral nervous system, it's going to be located in a ganglia, or singular is ganglion. And we're going to, instead of be calling upper and lower motor neurons, we're going to call them preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron, which in the image they just call it ganglionic neurons. But notice how you're going to have the autonomic ganglia located in the peripheral nervous system. Therefore, you're going to have a preganglionic neuron before the ganglion that actually originates in the hypothalamus, and a postganglionic neuron that will synapse with the visceral effectors. And what can be these visceral effectors? Well, they're going to be the smooth muscle located in the organs. You can also activate glands. It can also influence the cardiac muscle and adipocytes. And we will talk about all these different mechanisms in a little bit more detail in the next learning outcomes. But for now, the only thing that I need you to know is that they are similar in the fact that both of them will have an afferent pathway that will go from a receptor all the way to the central nervous system. It will also have an efferent pathway that will go from the central nervous system to an effector. In the case of the somatic nervous system, is a skeletal muscle. In the case of an autonomic nervous system, is going to be your visceral organs. And therefore, with regards to the neurons, if we're talking about the somatic nervous system, the neurons are going to be present in the nuclei because they are in the central nervous system. If we're talking about the autonomic nervous system, the neurons are going to be present in the ganglia because that's where they're going to synapse, and these are going to be outside of the central nervous system, in the peripheral nervous system. And then we also have a difference in the naming of these effector neurons. With regards to somatic nervous system, they're called either upper or lower motor neurons. And in the autonomic nervous system, we have what we call the preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. We have two main subdivisions of the autonomic nervous system, which are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And most often, the two main subdivisions are going to have opposing effects. So what does this mean? It means that if the sympathetic division is going to cause, for example, an excitation, the parasympathetic division will cause an inhibition. But of course, this is not always the case because there are some exceptions. So when they have opposing effects, basically the two divisions, they're going to work independently, with some structures being innervated by only one of the divisions, or in case that they work together, each subdivision will be able to control one stage of whatever complex process your body is responding to. But in general, the parasympathetic division is most active under resting conditions, so the rest and digest, which is being represented by this image over here where the lady is basically meditating and relaxing, while the sympathetic division is the more active during times of exertion or stress or emergency. So this will be the fight or flight, which is being represented by this other image up here. So of course, if you have in this image several tiny little fish, they feel like they can fight a big fish. And in the other way, you have the shark going after the fish and they feel like they can't fight, so they're going to run away. So that will be the flight. You're running away from whatever situation your body is exposed to. Also, the sympathetic division can be called the thoracolumbar division because basically the nerves that are exiting the spinal cord will be located in the thorax and the lumbar regions. And the parasympathetic can be called the craniosacral division because the nerves are going to be exiting either from the cranial region or the sacral region. In addition, we have a third subdivision which is called the enteric nervous system, and this is going to be made up of this very extensive network of neurons and nerves that are going to be located in the walls of the digestive tract. And although the activities of the enteric nervous system are going to be influenced by the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions, there are many complex visceral reflexes that are actually going to be initiated and coordinated at the level of the digestive system. So without the instructions from the central nervous system. Therefore, we will talk about this when we get to the digestive system. So for now, we're just going to focus on the sympathetic and parasympathetic subdivisions.